Drop the ball? When have you ever not dropped the ball, Jesse? Blasted it out of your mind on whatever the hell that was. What was that?
Japan?
Jesus.
I was on my day off, man. What I do on my day off is
off. We were on, junkie, on.
We are back. It's been too long since I've been able to yap into my mic about pointless gaming nonsense, so today I thought we'd talk about something a little bit more broad. From Crash's iconic death sound to the HEV charger suits in Half-Life. This is really a limitless topic, and in saying that, if this does well, and you have suggestions, I'll definitely do a part 2. But these are just a bunch of the recognizable sounds that I personally love. I was a little bit hesitant on including this first one, as I wasn't really sure whether to include dialogue at all or just leave it as a separate video altogether. But I don't think anyone's repeating this in a public space unless they're a bit cracked out. Banjo's music and sound effects were entirely done by Grant Kirkhope. This wasn't his first time working on something for Rare, as he previously converted David Wise's score for Diddy Kong's Quest to a Game Boy port, and helped on the massive titan GoldenEye 007. Now you're probably wondering about the decision behind making one sound for each character's dialogue. It's actually very straightforward. There was limited time to actually implement dialogue as a feature, but Rare also felt that actual speech could ruin the player's perception of characters. But I'm so glad they kept this, as I would argue aside from maybe the characters in the soundtrack, this is the most iconic part of the series. This sound right here, everyone knows what this sound is. It doesn't matter if you haven't skateboarded before or you haven't played the games. I think this is probably one of the most recognizable video game sounds, just top 10 in general. We all know by this point how big of an impact the Tony Hawk series had, for gaming, music, but even meme culture. There's also a few other recognizable sound effects that almost made this cut. But where did this special trick sound come from? With a quick Google search, I got the answer from Sound Effects Wiki, and basically this sound came from Tommy Tallarico Studios. The reason I emphasize studios is because doing a deeper dive, there is a lot more lore behind Tommy Tallarico being a bit of a liar and a narcissist about what he actually worked on. I also learned a bit of this from watching this video here called Where Did the Oof Sound Come From by HBummerGuy. So I went straight to the source and found, while yes, Tom Tallarico Studios was used, Joey Carraz was the main producer credited for Pro Skater 1 sound effects. The effect did change throughout the years, as these games were pumped out pretty much every year like COD games. I just assumed that every producer in charge of the sound effects after Pro Skater 1 put their own little spin or remaster on the sound. Springs are about as crucial to a Sonic game as a warp pipe in Mario. They've changed a bit throughout the years in sound and design, but it's always been an iconic staple to the franchise. That being said, most of you probably know this sound in particular. This is from the first ever Sonic game, Sonic the Hedgehog for the Sega Genesis. Published in 1991, this game's soundtrack and sound effects were entirely composed by Masato Nakamura. He's had a lot of involvement with Nintendo, but I only really saw composing roles for the first 2 Sonic games, which is a real shame because they slap. I swear so many great sounds come from extreme sports games in particular, and Jet Set Radio is no exception. Known for its groundbreaking art style at the time and killer soundtrack, Hideki Naganuma was the lead composer for Jet Set Radio and Jet Set Radio Future. Before working at Sega, Naganuma was a DJ and a bartender at Blue Note in Tokyo from years of 1993 to 1997. During that time, he was actually trying to break into the J-pop music industry. In 1998, Naganuma would send Sega some demo tapes to show off his musical talent, which would eventually land him a job at the company. He would eventually compose music for the Hip Jog Jog in 2000, which was like a Sega toy that almost looked like a McDonald's toy, but you can hear the influence coming through this thing.
Come on. Let's go. Come on.
Naganuma, along with various artists, would compose the music for Jet Set Radio, being inspired by sounds of genres like big beat. Hideki would also go on to compose music for Jet Set Radio Future in 2002. He was also the only person credited for the sound effects in the game. I did a bit of research, but unfortunately there's not any interesting story behind the sound itself, or any of the sound effects for that matter. All the Jet Set Radio samples are sample packs that Sega had purchased for their composers, that had been taken from popular artists such as Mobb Deep, and I can only assume the sample came from one of these packs. Portal is an example of a company taking a chance on a concept and pulling it off perfectly. It spawned one of the biggest memes of the late 2000s and has a really diverse soundtrack between both games, which I definitely want to talk about in another video. On top of that, the sound design is amazing, and I've actually got another video talking about some of the details in Portal 2, so if you want to check that out, I'll leave it here. But I want to talk about the best part of the sound design in the first game, the portal gun. In the first game, most of the scenarios and world design you see around you is relatively grounded, and I think the portal gun sound perfectly encapsulates a sci-fi feel yet grounded tone. It's punchy, futuristic, but it never sounds gimmicky. It doesn't have this ridiculous tail on the end of it. Kelly Bailey was the lead composer on the Portal 1 soundtrack, and was responsible for a lot of early Valve titles. Mike Moraski was brought on halfway through Portal 1's development, and only had small contributions to the game, including the music for the Cake is a Lie Ratman room. Sound effects like the portal gun, as far as I can assume, were done by Kelly Bailey. It's hard to find the credits, but he did do the sound effects for the Half-Life games. Things like the pulse rifle were basically reused in the Portal games with new Foley and sound effects. The Wii had one of the most, if not the most, coherent tone and aesthetic of any console in my opinion. It had its own mascots that were used in their own games and bled into other games, and I would argue is the most revolutionary console UI of all time, having its own weather channel, mail, and food ordering system.
Hey, babe, what do you say we go over to my place and watch a little SpongeBob? Do you want my Squidward in your sandy cheeks?
And on top of all that, you get the best music and sound design to go with it. Kazumi Totaka produced all of the sounds for the Wii's UI, as well as the monolithic list of credits for other Nintendo games. He did the sound and music for Wii Sports, the Wii Channel music, and that includes the Wii Shop theme, and what I randomly found out through doing some research doing this video, he actually did the voice for Yoshi. Continuing the theme of portals, I want to talk about the Super Mario 64 painting sound effect. There was a lot of iconic sounds to sift through for this game, and I found a lot of interesting pieces of info on the way Nintendo 64 games worked with the limitations. They always needed to try and back up on certain elements to save for cartridge space. One of the ways Mario 64 did this is by reusing sounds like Bowser's laugh. It's actually just Boo's laugh slowed down. Nintendo, much like Sega and other companies at the time, would just buy audio libraries for their sound engineers. These CDs were reused a lot in other pieces of media. I found a Reddit post that actually theorizes that there's this early 90s Cadbury ad that has the painting sound in it, and that it basically is just reused in Super Mario 64. Have a listen. And then if you just kind of slow it down a tad, But again, it could be just a very similar sound, but I like to believe it's the same one. Crash Bandicoot growing up for me was amazing. I didn't have a PS1, but whenever I knew someone who did have one, I just wanted to come over and either play Crash or Spyro. Something about the movement in these games, the colourful graphics and charm of the sounds really hooked me. Unlike most other games we've talked about, there was actually 3 producers working on the sound design for Crash Bandicoot: Michael Gollum, Ron Horwitz, and Kevin Spears. I couldn't actually find out how much involvement each designer had, but Ron Horwitz seems to have the biggest IMDb. In an interview with Ron Horwitz talking about the Spyro games, he apparently rocked up to Naughty Dog when most of the team was just in their early 20s and asked them if they needed a sound designer. He had extensive experience in the film and TV industry, but also in animation, which the team seemed to be more interested in. This influence definitely takes charge, as Crash goes all out on goofy and wacky sounds that seem like they were sampled from Looney Tunes. There's so many iconic sounds like the TNT sound to the Tiki Mask sounds, but the most recognizable I would think has to be the spin sound. Unlike some of the other sounds in Crash, the spin sound was probably just found in another audio library that was bought by Naughty Dog. But I do like the idea of engineers sorting through these CDs of sounds to find the best sound that just fits for that moment, and then it goes on to become so big it's only associated with the game. Early Pokemon games were a bit past my time, and I think I only fully completed Pokemon Platinum on the DS, but I do own some older games like Gold and Silver. Back when these games used to work, they worked with very limited hardware at the time. As well as a game engine, the sound engine is actually a very integral part to games development. For example, Minecraft actually has a very basic sound engine. It's only really able to stretch and pitch things. This is why most of the game has this very homemade Foley feel to it. This is also the case for the Pokemon games, as a lot of the sounds were reused and slightly pitched down or up, or just straight up reused. I think the most fun I would have as a kid playing these games was finding a really cute Pokemon and then just laughing about how cursed it would sound when you finally busted this thing out of its circular prison. Junichi Masuda composed the music and sound effects for the original Pokemon games, including Red, Blue, and Yellow. He composed the music for the original games on his Commodore Amiga computer. He then converted the music to the Game Boy by using a program that he wrote himself. There's a really great video that I'll link in the description explaining how limited the Game Boy was and exactly why they turned out so cursed, but basically there's only 38 original Pokemon cries. From there, they are edited with pitch shift and stretching to make unique cries, and almost all of them are made up of fast pulses derived from mono, square, and saw waves. I find it amazing that simple choices from samples implemented into a sound font, limitations, or even a UI sound can make such an impact on a game. So much so that sometimes it lives on through meme culture and even gets brought back to life with new remakes. If you have any favorite sound effects you'd like me to talk about, leave them in the comments, and thanks for the support. I'll see you in the next one.